One of the pieces of news that is very recent is that President Trump's tax returns were released, and they are accessible now to members of Congress, and probably by the time you hear this, they'll be accessible to us as well. And there are three things going on with his taxes that I think are very relevant. The first is, we'll take them in order of depravity. The least is that the fact that he paid no taxes, or almost no federal taxes, year after year after year after year, while claiming to be a billionaire, that is not necessarily wrong. This is an issue of tax policy and legislation. If tax policy and financial policy for our country dictates that people who are ridiculously rich will not pay federal taxes, then we should not be surprised that people who are billionaires pay little or no federal taxes. You might say we have the best Congress that money can buy. That's an old Dave Barry line. Goodness, it's difficult not to be that cynical. But that is the first point. That I'm not going to pay any more taxes than I have to. Here in the next month or two, I'll be filing my federal taxes. And when they say, hey, you want to give money to the Darter Snail Defense Fund? I'll probably say no. They have all these different things at the end. I think that's more the state taxes, where they say, here, make a contribution to this, make a contribution to that. I'll make my own contributions, and that's just fine. The second thing that is going on here, and so the first is nobody's paying any more taxes than they absolutely have to. And that Trump didn't pay any taxes, that is not in itself a difficulty. Shoot, Amazon got a huge refund on their taxes. And if any corporation should have been paying taxes, it should have been them. But they have armies of tax accountants to do their best to make sure their taxes are as low as possible so that the tax burden they have is negative instead of something they have to pay. It's money that goes back to them. Where it starts to stink is that what he used to be President Trump, has often said that, oh, I can't show you my taxes. I'm being audited under the standard operating procedure of the IRS that all presidents' taxes are audited. However, Trump was able to put his lickspittles into positions of power within the IRS so that his taxes were never audited in the first place. And this big line about, oh, I can't show you my taxes, they're being audited. They weren't ever being audited in the first place. It was a black joke, that Chorna Shutka, that was just sickening to behold once it came out that he had used his influence to keep his taxes from being audited as was required from presidential successors to the presidency. Now, the third may well cause troubles. It's difficult to say. As I say, Teflon Dons get away with it and 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 get away with it until they don't get away with it. And Al Capone was brought down on tax fraud. What we know about Trump's taxes is that there were tons of deductions and tons of depreciation on assets, and they were not documented. They were just presented as, oh, here they are. And if you want the documentation, you can ask me for it. And that is the case for a lot of tax returns. They don't want 12 suitcases full of documentation. Tell us what you say, and if we want to check on it, we have every right to come to and check on it, unless you're president and have the ability to put your lickspittles into positions of power at the IRS, and then no questions will be asked. But questions can be asked. What is it? 7 years with the IRS? They can go back and request documentation of what you have purported to be your depreciations and your deductions. Well, that could be a big problem for Trump and Trump's corporation, because his co-workers and his people who take care of his finances have often said that when it comes to taxes, he will lowball the value of his properties. When it comes to wanting to get a loan on that asset, he will exaggerate the value of the property. If those figures do not add up, it is either wire fraud, mail fraud, or it's tax fraud, one or the other. So those are the three issues. One, I don't think is an issue. The problem that very wealthy people pay very few taxes, and that bozo citizens like you and me get audited at much more often than the very wealthy, for whom it would take an IRS agent months and months and months and months to audit that person. For me, they can just walk in and say, you owe more money. And so far, my experience has been they were right and I was wrong. But to go after a person who's very wealthy and has been trying to cheat the system for years and years, that's going to take a long time. And he has tons of attorneys to hide behind and to stretch out and stretch out and stretch out the any civil penalties he might have. And for tax fraud, very often the penalties are financial. And if you're wealthy enough, then whenever the penalties are financial, then that action is legal for you. It's just a cost of doing business. But that's a problem with legislation and can only be changed through legislation. And I've talked before about how that can change. But I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. And the second is that he was never audited. But the third is the biggest problem, and that is all those undocumented depreciation and deductions. And those may well be called to task. And when they are, that's tax fraud. That is criminal. That has penal consequences.